Okay, hello everyone. It's me, Profesor again, and this is the second of the six videos that will be seen with respect to the structure of the readings and the various elements of Daughter of Fortune, and of course a comparison with what's happening in the United States as we read Daughter of Fortune and Who Built America side by side. But first off, let me just adjust the camera here a little bit. First off, you might be wondering what's with the decor here. Looks like something from an insane asylum or a Holiday Inn from 1965. I'm actually at a travel lodge right now. This is one of those times in which during the course of the semester in which I have meetings on one day and then I have to take care of something else the following day. So instead of driving back up the 15 to my house. From time to time during the course of a semester, I'll do that and stay at a travel lodge, a Super 8, a Roadaway Inn, whoever has the good rates. Stay the evening and then head back to my house the following day. So that's what's happening here. So don't think that El Profesor got put into the loony bin or got taken by the paddy wagon or something to that effect. Okay, but let's go ahead now and focus in a little bit more on what's happening with the Daughter of Fortune story. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the themes, some of the people, the events happening in chapters of 4 through 7, and I guess to get along with the spirit of things, and you've seen my Argentina jersey before at the beginning of the semester, so I brought it back today. But like I said in one of the earlier videos, if I'd known I would have done something like this back in the summer, I probably would have bought a Chile jersey. Chile had a pretty good run in the World Cup. I'm kind of hoping that they have some improvement for next time, and same with Colombia as well, and Costa Rica as well. Okay, well, first off, let me go ahead and say a few things about what's happening within the scope of the United States, and zero in on a few elements. Zero in on a few elements with respect to what's happening in Chapter 6. And the reading for this week was, of course, Chapter 6, the consolidation of slavery in the South. And I'll just quickly go over a couple of things right here. I'll point out a few items with respect to what's going in the textbook. But clearly, the main element that's happening here is that we're seeing the emergence of this cotton culture. That is this idea of King Cotton. And as you read in the textbook, King Cotton permeated virtually every aspect of life in the South, but also made a lot of inroads in the North too. Because keep in mind, when you have these industries in the North, whether in Boston or in Philadelphia, a lot of these burgeoning factories, of course, depend on raw materials, and cotton was, of course, the main raw material at that time. So places in the North like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Providence developed a lot of these customs houses, these financial firms, mainly because of the profits that were being generated by cotton. So clearly, the North was complicit in many respects with the idea of this notion of King Cotton, and not surprisingly, you see all kinds of advances, not only in economic affairs but in technology affairs too, because you got to take this stuff from place to place. So of course, shipping becomes a very dominant theme too. And as we were seeing in Daughter of Fortune, shipping is a persistent theme with respect to movement of goods, movement of people. John Summers is definitely symptomatic of this idea of a merchant class or class of people who are instrumental in taking goods from one part to the other. So clearly the continuity between shipping and Daughter of Fortune and shipping with respect to the South and in the United States in general in the early parts of the 19th century, these are dominant themes that we're seeing emerging and we're seeing quite nicely in both the Who Built America text and also in Daughter of Fortune. But of course, part and parcel of this idea of King Cotton and this the growth of slavery is, of course, the need for land, the need for resources. So not surprising, access to lands, access to new markets. These are things which are becoming dominant too as a Southern culture, as slavery culture really starts to get a stranglehold, not only so much on the South itself, but on the entirety of the United States. And of course, as we saw in one of the previous chapters, the whole notion about the 3/5 compromise was, of course, to keep the South within the the new union. The framers, of course, don't mention the idea of slavery in the Constitution, but clearly the Three-Fifths Compromise was a way of, you might say, the lesser of the lesser of two evils. That is, well, we're not going to call it slavery, but we have to keep the South in the Union, so let's just call it that. And of course, it would take until the Civil War to really finally break this notion once and for all. But still, to this day, into the 1960s, of course, it would take presidents like John F. Kennedy and of course Lyndon Johnson to really work even harder to try to break the grip, that is, break the stranglehold that King Cotton and slavery culture had on the South and for the United States for the better part going of not only the 19th century but the after effects spilling over into the 20th century. Okay, let me just quickly jump ahead a little bit here to maybe to a couple of other points that I before I go on to talking about the daughter fortune. Of course, as I mentioned, territorial expansion. So again, this idea of expanding territory, that is for access to lands, especially for the growth of cotton. This is definitely something that's going to be into the mindset, you might say, the burgeoning mindset of manifest destiny, because if American industrialists or if entrepreneurs are interested in lands, that is in the South, what's to stop them from being interested in lands maybe further toward the West, toward California, access to markets in South America, Latin America, later on into Asia. So you might say this mentality of having land, as Thomas Jefferson would put it, land as a safety valve for democracy, and in this case, land as a necessity for the expansion of the slavery culture, the idea of King Cotton. That's a very dominant theme that we're seeing emerging, that's being spelled out in Chapter 6. All right, let me just quickly flip ahead a couple of pages here. So again, in Chapter 6, there's a description about the Louisiana Purchase. The problems that slavery causes with respect to the whole notion of the Missouri Crisis and of course the Missouri Compromise. So some very important points there, and of course what happens to the Native American populations, because the Native American populations, of course, they're in the way of progress, so to speak. And this is stuff that Andrew Jackson was a big believer in terms of. Allowing people to have access to these lands and pushing the Indians further and further west to what was then known as a permanent Indian frontier. That was the idea back in those days, but this idea of a permanent frontier didn't really last long, as the United States kept pushing further and further west, especially leading up to the Civil War, and then from the Civil War onward into the early parts of the 20th century. Okay, let me quickly see what else I need to mention here about Chapter 6. A little bit, of course, about the brutality, the troubles that slavery causes, with African American families, breaking families up, selling families, breaking them apart, and also how slavery really affects a lot of the poor farmers, the yeoman farmers, as they were called, how they depended upon this burgeoning planter class. Who in essence were like an oligarchy. You might say there's elements of feudalism going on in the Old South back in those days. Okay, a little bit more about religion and how African Americans embraced the Christianity as a means of protest. But all in all, I think that the main point that I'm trying to present here, with respect to the idea of what's happening in Chapter 6, is that the United States, of course, is an expanding country, and whether you're talking about expansion in terms of industries and ideas from the northern parts of the country, which we'll actually get into a little bit more in next week's topics, but in this case focusing it on the South, this idea of pushing westward, having more access to land, more access to territories, expanding trade. That, of course, is a very dominant theme that I think both South and North have in common. So when we get into the 1850s with the Daughter of Fortune story, not surprisingly, many Americans at this point in time, that is, whether you're a Southerner or whether you're a Northerner, you have this notion that you want to expand the boundaries, not so much say of freedom and liberty and democracy per se, but expand the boundaries of commerce, of free trade, and these are some of the themes, of course, that we see emphasized quite a bit in Daughter Fortune in the persons of John Summers, and more so Paulina Rodriguez, whom I'll talk a little bit more about. So, in other words, As the Daughter of Fortune is unfolding, the United States by the 1850s already had this sense of course, of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny, of course, had already happened with the U.S.-Mexico War, but you might say the after effects, the lingering effects of manifest destiny spilled over into the 1850s, but the roots of manifest destiny go even further than that. So what we're looking at here in Chapter 6 are some of the economic roots and a little bit of the political roots of manifest destiny, which convinced many Americans that yes, we want to see what's over in California, we want to go over toward the West, and we want to see what's happening in Chile too. We want to expand markets in South America, in Latin America, maybe on into Asia. So my argument here is that the events that's being described in Chapter 6 fit in perfectly or spill over. They lead into some of the topics, some of the overriding themes that's happening in the Daughter of Fortune story. Okay, let's go ahead and quickly recap and elaborate on some of the topics and themes happening in Daughter of Fortune. And these are the chapters 4 through 7. And I had a couple of inquiries. In fact, a couple of you who have been reading Daughter of Fortune from Kindle or from iBooks, and you're not seeing any page numbers. So for those, let me quickly recap in terms of the names of the chapters that we're looking at. Again, chapters 4 through 7. So we're talking about the chapters, talking about the 4 chapters at the end of part 1. We're talking about A Ruined Reputation, Suitors, Miss Rose, and Love. Those are the 4 chapters that we're working on this week. So without further ado, let me go ahead and talk a little bit more about some of the key events happening in each of those chapters. And to do that, I actually have my notes on. I got so many gadgets here. I should have bought Apple stock. Okay, I'm just gonna open up notes here, and I'll quickly go over some of the key points and themes happening in each chapter. Okay, let me take my glasses off again since I'm actually nearsighted, so I have to have things in front of me without my glasses, so I can better see what's going on. Okay, in chapter 4, this is a chapter, A Ruined Reputation, and clearly Chile is changing because of all kinds of new ideas, and this is a point we're looking at in which we're seeing these new industrialists, new ideas, new innovations, steamships. These are things which are, you might say, threatening the old Chilean oligarchy, because as Chile developed as a Spanish colony, of course, very traditional, very conservative, you might say, old fuddy-duddies, old fogies, and I think this is where Agustín del Valle comes into the picture. Agustín del Valle represents the landed estates, the oligarchies, the hacienda, the patron system. These are people who, you might say, claim to be descendants of the Spanish conquistadores, that they're old guard, they're old style, blah, blah, blah. But what happens is, as Chile begins to open up to the world by the 1850s, about 30 years after its independence, all kinds of new ideas. So new ideas from Europe and the United States are coming into Chile, and these are things which really drive Agustín del Valle and his class bonkers, for lack of a better term. And among these young thinkers, these idealists wanting to change the order, we're talking about Joaquin Andieta and also Jacob Todd. We met Jacob in last week's reading. But one of the things Allende points out is that in chapter 4 we see a contrast between how Joaquin composes himself and how Jacob composes himself. So Joaquin is a little, even though he comes across as a romantic, a matador, a toreador figure, something like Ernest Hemingway would definitely celebrate and promote in his novels. Joaquin seems to have a little bit more of a grounded sense of reality. He's more sure of himself. Jacob, at this point in time, early in the story, we don't really know where he's going. He seems to be a chameleon. Jacob, of course, is there in Chile trying to sell Bibles as part of a Protestant mission, but he's not really up to the task. In fact, if anything, we don't really know what Jacob's religion is. Is he atheist? Is he agnostic? Is he Catholic? Whatever. Jacob seems to have this disdain of organized religion, and I think it's a reflection of what Allende's views on religion are. As the story unfolds. So Jacob's a very interesting character, and we're going to see more and more about how Jacob changes and you might say changes with the times as the story unfolds. Okay, later on in the chapter, we meet more about Paulina del Valle Rodriguez because Paulina, she emerges as one of the main business figures. One of the things about what's happening in California is that we're seeing a lot of women come into the region, and they're able to reinvent themselves. There's a famous case of Lucina Wilson. She came from the Midwest, and she opened up a hotel, an early version of a hotel. She and her husband worked hard because like many Californians, like many people coming to California, they knew that you couldn't make money off the gold, you couldn't make money off of mining, but you could make money off the miners, and that's where Paulina del Valle comes into the picture. Or Paulina Rodriguez, again, del Valle is her maiden name, Rodriguez is her married name, so I'll probably alternate between the two over these next few videos. But keep an eye on Paulina because even though Eliza is the main heroine, Paulina emerges, I think, as a prototype for the typical businesswoman, the early businesswoman in California, and we'll see a little bit more about Paulina's actions as chapter 4 concludes. Okay, in chapter 5, chapter 5 is a chapter suitors, and here Eliza really starts to blossom as a young lady, and like many of the high class or upper crust people at the time, Rose Summers, of course, Rose wants to make sure that Eliza is a proper woman, that she's respectable, she's this and she's that. So one of the more humorous elements takes place in chapter 5, in which Rose tries to get an English naval officer to be her husband, and without getting into any details, we're going to see you might say Rose's playfulness comes to the picture, but the young Englishman, he kind of misreads things or sees things differently than what Rose had anticipated, and the results predictably turned out to be quite hilarious. So I'll leave it at that. But clearly, what that shows you is that for her part, Rose Summers, she wants to try to recreate upper crust Victorian English life in Chile, but it turns out that things don't quite work out as they seem, as you'll find out in chapter 5. Okay, also at this point in time, Eliza's sense of womanhood begins to blossom when she falls in love with Joaquin Andela. So the romance between Eliza and Joaquin, that starts to come to the forefront at the very end of chapter 5. Okay, chapter 6, we get to find out more about Rose's personality and her character. And in this chapter, Miss Rose, we begin to find out more about what Rose was like back in England, and at this point in time, and this is common in many Latin American novels. A lot of novelists do this, whether it's male or female. Is that when it comes to overt sexuality, sexual overtones, double entendres, things of this nature, Latin American authors aren't shy from that stuff. So whether you read stuff from Isabel Allende, from Carlos Fuentes, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who I think was a master at this kind of stuff, you're going to see a lot of the stuff here. So I hope this doesn't offend anybody who's not used to this type of reading, but this is a very common element in Latin American literature, and we see a prime example of this type of stuff playing out in chapter 6, Miss Rose. But even though the depictions tend to get a little bit, I guess you might say, lurid, racy, risque from time to time, I think these are very important elements because these go to the core of what Rose is like and what her personality is like, and how from that perspective, this is something that her brother Jeremy, you might say, tries to put a lid on. So again, to understand a little bit more about Rose's character, chapter 6 is very instrumental. So without getting into all the details of what happens between Rose and her lover Carl, the tenor singer, go ahead. You'll find out more about that. You'll find out all about that yourselves as you continue with chapter 6. Okay, finally, chapter 7. The chapter is called Love, and at this point in time, you might say Eliza, she's doing things which Rose had done at a young age. So Rose, in a sense, she wants to try to put a stop to Eliza's foolishness. Rose did some foolish things when she was younger, so she wants to make sure that Eliza doesn't fall into that trap. But not surprisingly, Rose's attempts to put an end to this foolishness tend to be, shall we say, don't exactly work out as planned, or you might say they're more or less half-hearted measures, so to speak. um, we find a little bit more about the antics that Eliza and Joaquin get into, all the secret games, all the that is the games that they're playing as their young romance starts to unfold. But even though this chapter is filled with a lot of references to romance and love making and playing games and things of this nature, we begin to find out right off the bat that maybe there's not that much of a connection between Eliza and Joaquin. Maybe it's more, you might say, of a typical high school, junior high, middle school type of crush, and it seems that Joaquin, he's interested in all these kinds of ideas, these romantic ideas. That is trying to ensure equality. That is, he's concerned about the differences between the haves and the have-nots. What is government doing to people? So all kinds of, you might say, theoretical questions that the founding fathers had been talking about in Philadelphia back in the days of 1776. These were things which Joaquin seems to be interested in and talk about, but Eliza, for her part, she's a little confused about this. She doesn't quite get where Joaquin is coming from. So already toward the end of the chapter, we're seeing a little bit of the split differences between Rose and Eliza and Joaquin as the chapter begins to unfold. So for all intents and purposes, you might say for Eliza, it's more the idea of Joaquin, not so much Joaquin himself, and this will be something that Eliza would have to struggle with for the rest of the novel, all the way to the very end chapter. Okay, so there you have it, everybody. A brief description of what's happening, the key events and the key themes happening in chapters 4 through 7. For the most part, we're getting more of a character sketches in terms of what are the things which drive both Eliza and Rose, and also too, we're finding more about the business acumen, that is how astute Paulina was with respect to business. So finding out more about some of the three main female protagonists, Eliza, Rose, and Paulina. This is definitely one of the hallmarks of Allende's work. She does the same thing quite a bit in her other classic work, The House of Spirits, or especially La Casa de los Espíritus. So very strong women, how they deal with all kinds of circumstances, whether it's personal, whether it's financial, or whether it's political, as in the case of House of the Spirits. We see quite a bit of that beginning to emerge in these 4 chapters 4 through 7. Okay, well there you have it, everybody. So this video and the previous video, this looks at events happening in Chile from 1843 to 1848, and even the information from Humboldt America is a little bit behind the times in terms of where we are in Daughter of Fortune. I think slowly but surely in these next 2 videos we'll begin to see a little bit more of a catch-up effect in terms of the ideas of a manifest destiny. And the antebellum era that is the era of the 1850s before we get to the Civil War. So in the next couple of videos, we begin to make more and more of a connection as the events in Humboldt America and Daughter of Fortune begin to slowly coalesce and combine. Join together like the classic song sung by The Who. All right, well that's it from here, everybody. That's it from my beautiful little mansion setting or a five-star room here at the Travel Lodge. But definitely in the next videos, I'll definitely be back in the home headquarters. And actually, one of the later videos, I'm actually going to be out of the state in which I do this. I'll actually be in the Motor City. So that's going to be interesting too. But for these next 2 weeks, for sure, the next couple of videos will definitely be back from the home headquarters. And if the weather's nice, then maybe Mr. Nick or Miss Sniffles will come and join us. Okay, well that's it from here. You guys take care. And again, don't forget, everybody. Please, let's start getting the group discussions going. If we had the readings, now we're coming to the second week of the readings, so I definitely want to make sure that we get the readings going. And we get the discussions going in the forum. So again, check with the group leaders. I'm still looking for people in group 1. Hopefully, I can get that taken care of in the next couple of days. But when you're ready to start posting comments in your respective groups, talk to your leaders first. arrange what you want to work on, and then go in from there. So that's it from here. You guys take care, and I'll see you guys again next time when we talk about part 3, the third installment of the Daughter of Fortune readings.